right, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. This collaboration between QuEra and Deloitte, I think, started 2 years ago at Q2B. Dan was kind enough to walk over to our booth, and we said, "Hey, Dan, you know we do multi-class classification." He says, "Really?" And then over these 2 years, Deloitte became such an expert in QuEra and in quantum reservoir computing, which Dan will talk about. QuEra, for those of you that don't know, makes neutral atom quantum computers. We are both the scientific and commercial leaders in neutral atoms. We've got a system deployed for 2 years on Amazon Bracket, and we're selling and shipping systems worldwide. When I interview people, one of the things I sometimes ask them is, please explain to me what a spiral staircase is without using your hands. So with using your hands, it's easy. You say it says this like this, right? But do a spiral staircase without using your hands. So now I'm going to explain to you quantum reservoir computing without slides. We'll see if that works, and then we'll see how that works. So quantum reservoir computing is a quantum machine learning algorithm. And the notion of reservoir computing has actually existed classically. And imagine that you've got a reservoir, a bathtub or a lake. And imagine that you take inputs and you encode them in, say, the position of tiny stones that you throw at the edge of the lake. And then you measure the ripples on the other side. And if the lake was perfectly flat, this is very repeatable. You could throw the stones exactly the same location, and you could measure the exact same ripples. But you don't truly know what's going on inside the lake. You just can measure the output. So this is what quantum reservoir computing does. We have a system with 256 atoms. We encode the input. The input could be an image that has gone through reduction through to see what the important parameters are. It could be a time series, so we can do both classification as well as prediction. We encode the inputs. We could encode them in the position of the atoms. We could encode them in the drive we give to the atoms. We can encode them in, sorry for being too geeky about it, in the detuning of the atoms. And then we measure the system, and then we use these measurements as input to a classical linear regression model, and that's how we train and then predict the system. So the upside of quantum reservoir computing is that unlike other machine learning, unlike other quantum machine learning approaches, it's not susceptible to all these errors and retraining and changing the parameters, all the problems that plague other quantum machine learning algorithms. And also, the other nice thing is that most of the training is actually classical. So we basically use the reservoir to transform the input into something. And then we'll talk now about some amazing results. By the way, we also have a webinar that we did a couple months ago where the Deloitte team did home price prediction and image classification and a whole bunch of stuff. So I will get off stage and let you share the magic.
Well, thank you, Yuval, for giving me the chance to present. Let me figure out exactly. There we go. So I'm with Deloitte. And McKenna was talking about crime and money laundering, and to go along with that, I'm going to talk about drugs, particularly drug discovery. But I wanted to say we've actually used this method for a lot of different data types, as you've all spoke about, home prices, manufacturing defects, also a multi-classification of medical images. So this is a very easy to deploy across a multitude of different problem types, this quantum reservoir computing, and it solves a lot of problems that I'm going to get to. But first, let me introduce who I am. I am Dan Beaulieu. I'm the quantum machine learning lead at Deloitte. In case you don't know Deloitte, we are big. We have a lot of people. We operate in a lot of countries, and we do a lot of different types of activities. So we are system integrators. We're one of the big 4 accounting firms. We also have a cybersecurity practice. We have a big presence in the Gen AI and machine learning space. We're NVIDIA's Partner of the Year. Essentially, we think of quantum as another tool in the tool belt. If your problem is a good quantum problem, we might come talk to you. But if it turns out, hey, this is more of just a machine learning or some other type of problem, we're happy to deliver those services too. So moving on, we are a team, a small but mighty team. We have a global quantum presence. Our leader, Scott Buchholz, is here. He's the global quantum lead. But what I really want to get at is we have a team of PhDs, DevOps experts, and people who are just really good at deploying quantum machine learning solutions. So what we were doing in this particular study, which we released on Monday on arXiv, we're getting it peer reviewed. We're hoping to get it in a nice journal soon. But we are doing a regression. So one thing that's really great about quantum reservoir computing is that when you're doing it, especially when you're doing it with QuEra, you can do time series, you can do classification, you can do multiple classification, multi-class classification, and you can do regression. So we are doing a regression on molecular activity. We're trying to predict whether this is, a good candidate for a compound for a drug. So what we did was we used a quantum reservoir computing methodology, and unlike some of the other quantum machine learning hybrid methods where it goes back and forth between classical and quantum, what we're doing is we have a little pipeline where we use a quantum computer to create an interesting embedding for the data. We try to map the data in an interesting way, encode it in an interesting way, and then we put that interestingly structured data into a series of classical algorithms. We have like a whole battery, neural network, random forest, et cetera, and we pick the winner model. So we use the Rydberg neutral atom computer. We do a lot of clever math, and we encode it into a higher embedded space. And long story short, we got some results that are better in our classical models compared to just regular classical data or doing some sort of classical data structuring embedding technique. And the important part of this slide right here, where we're showing our workflow technique, is we're doing our data science fundamentals. That's to be expected. But one thing we had to do was because we had thousands of columns, we had to figure out a way to reduce the number of columns to be something that would run on a quantum simulator. One of the areas of, in the future, we're going to try to use more clever tensor network simulators, actually run on, bigger hardware and use more of the qubits and try to use even more features. But I think one of the things we did that was actually very clever is we tried to we did it at different sample sizes. Because for people that aren't really familiar with drug discovery and life science problems, there's a lot of issues where if you're studying a rare disease or you're studying a clinical trial, you don't have a lot of records. So we tried observing different subsamples of record sizes, like 100, 200, 800, and we wanted to see how do we make good subsamples that are actually consistent and statistically good, and then say, how does quantum machine learning learn how, Maria Schultz, some other people have hypothesized that you can learn more per record with quantum machine learning. And so we wanted to kind of test this out in a pretty rigorous way. So what we did was, and on the step 2 here, the first half is on the quantum computer, the quantum simulator, and we are actually doing using a quantum algorithm to take the data, put it into this nice structured way, embedding or higher dimensional space, and then we feed that into a classical machine learning pipeline, just some regular models, and we compare that to the regular data. And what we get is we get results that are actually, we get a more structured output that we can feed into this data, and we actually get some slightly better results. And then we actually create some visualizations to try to interpret this. I think a lot of quantum machine learning, it's very hard to interpret what the results are. So we're trying to actually explain what's going on. How is this actually working? So here is our big result right here, top line results. You can see for smaller record sizes, we got better results than the classical versions of the data. So we had a classical method, a kernel method of embedding this data, transforming this data in a more structured way, and then we just have the regular features that you don't do anything to, and then we have the, you can see the QRC, lower is better. The quantum reservoir computing got the best results for 100 and 200 records. This is 25 runs of data on the Merck molecular activity data set. I should also mention we were working with our partners at QuEra, Amgen, and Merck KGaA, and the University of Dulstef. And what we actually get here is, you can see this is outside of the margin of error. The blue bar and the orange bar are the classical methods. The pink bar is the quantum method of interest that we're talking about here, the quantum reservoir computing. And so what we see here, this slide, this is just to show we did 5 other data sets, and we got consistent results. We only ran 5 samples of them due to the interest of time and computing power and the limits of human endurance for a single paper. But you can see consistently there is kind of a pattern where it performs way better than the blue bar, which is a classical technique, and it usually performs better than the orange bar. But this is multiple data sets. We didn't just find some data set where it's like, oh, this data set is really kooky and we get some better results. Now, this is 5 different molecular activity data sets we got consistently decent results for. And I also want to stress that, these are real data sets. These are like these are like real world problem data sets. This isn't we're taking quantum data or some very esoteric toy data set. And I think that one of the big advantages of doing something like quantum reservoir computing is you're actually structuring it in a really interesting way. And it's kind of a universal way of taking data, putting it into a quantum system, and getting something more useful out of it. I think one of the big problems that's very underrated in quantum machine learning is how you encode data onto the quantum computer. It's not an answered problem. One of my colleagues, Andrew Vlasic, actually wrote a paper about this. But long story short, data encoding is one of the reasons quantum machine learning doesn't work for classical data is it's really hard to encode the data. I see a lot of people just doing angle encoding. It doesn't really do a great job. But you can kind of see here that the top 2 on the left are the classical versions. And there's not a clear pattern there, but you look at this one that says QRC embedding, the middle one right there, there's like this little tiny yellow dot of super highly concentrated high values, and there's a pretty clear gradient. And same thing on the bottom, you can see that for the 800 records, when we look at the classical data, it's just kind of, there's a tiny bit of like, okay, the lower values are kind of to the right a little bit. But if you look at the 2 QRC embeddings, it's clear that there is high values in the upper left, gradient down towards lower values. Like there's just a clear, you can very clearly visualize this in future work. We want to not just visualize and understand the structure of the data, we want to quantize it. So hopefully we get another paper out where we actually, get a really good objective measure of, this is 5% better than this, or et cetera. We can quantize it, show it's significantly different. But anyways, one thing I do want to point out is this paper is up right now on arXiv. So you can read it. We can get into all the equations and all the technical detail that I kind of glossed over. And, but I also want to point out that our Japanese firm was working with Mitsubishi Chemical and Classique, and they were able to compress circuits in a QAOA by 54% and a QPE equation by 97%. So that's and they were also working on drug discovery work. So I think that's really fascinating stuff that literally came out yesterday. We didn't really get to put that in this. It's so new that we didn't even get to put it in here. But I really wanted to stress that. That's really awesome results that our Japanese firm is getting. And we also yesterday released our Business Leader's Guide to Quantum Computing. It goes over, here are the applications you should be paying attention to. Here's how you build a quantum workforce. Here's why you should actually care about quantum as a business leader. And related to that, our global leader, Scott, he gave a talk on Tuesday about use cases for quantum computing in the financial industry. We actually collected a lot of data in conjunction with Q-Control, our partners, and we put a lot of work into that. It was a lot of analysis. We came up with the top 16 use cases. And Scott gave a pretty detailed breakdown of the top 6. And also, we have a peer-reviewed study that recently came out too about optimizing clinical trials. And that was in conjunction with the Cleveland Clinic and IBM. And that's really fascinating work. I think clinical trials are incredibly complicated, but also incredibly useful to optimize because of how expensive and how risky they are. So with that, I would like to say, please feel free to contact us. Feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer any questions, send you, have a chat with you, see if this, anything you have related to quantum or anything else, we could probably handle it. And with that, I'll take your questions.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So we don't have any questions that have come in yet. Please, if you have questions, try to use the QR code that we're going to display to transmit them to us. Thank you. So yeah, the QR code over there.
All right.
In the meantime, Daniel, just a minute. We're going to see if there's any questions coming in. We have just a little bit of time. But I have a question. So how does it scale, like the quantum reservoir computing, if you want to go to like larger data sets or number of features or more complex problems?
That's kind of the issue. It scales okay in terms of rows of data. So it scales probably polynomially, but like once the number of columns, it scales exponentially. And that's kind of the issue. So our data set had thousands of columns. That's why we had to kind of reduce the number of columns much more so than the number of rows. We were doing thousands of rows. We were doing 800 rows. We did 200 rows. We did 100 rows. And those were fine. But going from like 18 qubits to 24 qubits was like exponential difference. And unfortunately, we did restrict ourselves to only doing the number of qubits that we could simulate. We're actually working on a more efficient simulator based on quantum tensor networks. So now we can do way more qubits, but that's the next paper. We're actually already working on that. But yeah, so that is the constraining factor because it's hard to know, because this is really the first time we've worked with a neutral atom computer, do we know that this result we're getting is an actual result, or what are we getting? So we were trying to verify versus the simulator, and the simulator, even on a pretty beefy piece of equipment with 0.5 terabyte of RAM, 128 cores, and a giant GPU, it still was getting crushed by this equation. So.
Nice, thank you. So we have one question that came in. Can you discuss briefly QRC in relation to correlated time series?
I didn't do the time series work. We did. I know QuEra published a paper on quantum reservoir computing time series. I would have to defer to Yuval or his team on that. We actually are hoping to do that maybe in the future, but we did not run any time series on it. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't really address those questions.
Yeah, please for future work, I guess.
Yeah.
So thank you.
That's their work. I mean, we're more focused on other stuff, but yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Daniel. Please thank Daniel one more time.
Thank you.